A new season, a new menu for Chef, flavoured with dishes for discerning gourmets.
That one.
A dash of diplomacy.
Crispin, is that bowlful under your arm ever going to become a bechamel, or is it some kind of recherche fashion accessory you're currently affecting?
Yes, Chef.
A soupçon of charm.
Get me a large knife sharp like a razor. This instant, I have to castrate the person who made this sauce, and I want to avoid any unnecessary suffering.
A recipe of culinary chaos. Chef begins tomorrow at 9:30 on BBC1.
It's like you resent folk leaving rubbish.
I do.
At the cutting edge of waste disposal, they're common as mud.
Now you sweep it up, otherwise I'm on the phone to your boss. You're a miserable old witch, man!
You can't just sack them.
The rest of them see we mean business. We're not firing blanks anymore.
Not one of them's blown up.
You're not paid to think. You're a bin man.
I'm married. I'm not starting anything.
There's a very funny smell in here.
Common as mud begins in half an hour on BBC1.
A surprise birthday party for Grace, reunited with her two sisters on BBC2 shortly. They'll be the ones under fire.
The inside story on big-time car crime, with the people who fight it.
It's an ongoing battle of wits.
No, we're going for them.
And the people who suffer it.
It's not fair, and these people should be stopped. And I'm so angry.
BBC1's inside story on car crime, Thursday the 15th of September at 10.
Now, on BBC1, the 9 o'clock news with Michael Buerk.
John Major has declared total opposition to the idea of a two-tier Europe. He said he recoils from the suggestion of a hard core of countries at the centre of the Union and Britain on the outside. Ulster Securities relaxed a little, but the government's still looking for more from the IRA. And Benetton's been cleared of cheating over the Pit Lane fire. Good evening. The Prime Minister's firmly ruled out the idea of a two-tier European Union. He said there was real danger in talk of a hard core of states, leaving other countries excluded. But earlier in the day, Chancellor Kohl of Germany appeared to be pushing the plan. Progress, he said, can't be held up by the slowest ship in the convoy. Mr Major's remarks came in a set-piece speech at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He insisted Britain was committed to Europe, but the right sort of Europe. The Prime Minister was responding to suggestions last week from within both France and Germany that they, together with the three Benelux countries, could press ahead to form a European inner circle, agreeing on monetary and political union. That would leave the rest to proceed at a slower pace, with correspondingly less influence on European policy.
European electorate on a Dutch canal side tonight, John Major had taken to the university town of Leiden his message that low election turnouts had demonstrated Europe's unpopularity. Europe's institutions, he warned, had to become more flexible or they would break under the strain of enlargement. Earlier in his speech, he starkly rejected French and German calls for the development of an inner hard core of European Union nations, and he sought to destroy what he called the caricature of Britain as the one-nation awkward squad.
It is high time that the caricature of Britain in Europe was buried for good. We have a commitment which surely gives Britain the right, just as each other member has the same right, to advance her reasoned views without constant questioning of our European credentials.
Mr Major didn't rely on policy spin doctors to tease out his opposition to a two-tier Europe, but spelt it out quite plainly.
So I see a real danger in talk of a hard core, inner and outer circles, a two-tier Europe. I recoil from ideas for a union in which some would be more equal than others. There is not, and there never should be, an exclusive hard core either of countries or of policies.
More for domestic consumption, the Prime Minister set his face against any increase in powers for the European Parliament and underlined his anti-federalist commitment to a Europe of nation-states.
We must wait and see if over time our electorates begin to take the European elections more seriously. But for now, it would, in my judgment, be premature to consider a further increase in the Parliament's powers.
But if Mr Major's remarks were well received by his Dutch host, Prime Minister Wim Kok, there was a stark contrast with his former ally, Chancellor Kohl, who insisted today in the German Parliament that Germany was and would remain the motor of developments in Europe. Chancellor Kohl stressed that political union remained the German goal, adding, "We do not under any circumstances want the slowest ship in the convoy to stop developments in Europe." Mr Major's response to first French and German manoeuvrings in the run-up to the 1996 Intergovernmental Conference to review the Maastricht Treaty was a firm one. But Chancellor Kohl's words on political union will ensure that British hopes that could be a routine event, little more than a 5,000-mile service for Maastricht, will be disappointed. Mr Major has been forced onto the constitution-mongering agenda he dislikes, and into a debate which can only exacerbate Tory divisions. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Leiden.
Well, joining me now from Leiden is our Europe correspondent, James Robbins. James, how are the French and Germans going to react to John Major's speech? Are they going to accept it? Are they going to be annoyed by it? Or are they just going to ignore it?
They're certainly not going to accept it, neither the content nor, frankly, the way he expressed himself very forcefully in his full frontal attack on the whole idea of a hard core of elite countries, of some being more equal than others. That they'll certainly resent. They won't be angry publicly. But they do believe, rightly or wrongly, that John Major has shown that Britain remains so often the veto country, the one against the 11. He said that was a ludicrous caricature. They would point to this year's experience, his attempt to block changes in the majority voting system, his use of the veto at Corfu to block the Belgian Prime Minister becoming President of the European Commission. So the French and the Germans will certainly be angry in private about this. They will have to rethink their tactics ahead of the 1996 conference, but they cannot ignore what John Major says, because they know that he will be, or the Conservative government or the British government will be, a powerful voice in 1996.
But how serious are the French and Germans about this hard core at the centre of Europe idea? There seemed to be conflicting signals one day, but Chancellor Kohl was pushing it again today, wasn't he?
There was some ambiguity earlier on in the week because we didn't know to what extent the ideas coming forward from his party, the Christian Democrats, were official German government policy. They haven't yet been endorsed formally by the government, but what Chancellor Kohl said in the Bundestag in the German parliament was so strong that we can be in no doubt that he's reasserting his European credentials. And he obviously feels that he is in a strong position ahead of elections he expects to win next month, and he feels to have a new, refreshed democratic mandate, and will be able to press forward with his vision, sharply at odds with John Major's.
Briefly, James, how right is John Major when he hints, or says indeed, that the voters of France and Germany are thinking more along his lines?
Well, there is obviously evidence, particularly from the French referendum on Maastricht, and from the low turnout in the European elections in June, that there is widespread public disillusionment with the attempts to construct an integrated Europe, and that a lot of people feel out of touch with their political leaders across Europe. But where the French and the Germans would disagree is that will persist, and that people can't be won round, and they believe that John Major, when he says he has a realistic vision, is simply out of touch with the real groundswell which they believe they're tapping.
James, thanks very much. Earlier in Leiden, the Prime Minister said it was becoming clearer that the IRA ceasefire might not be just a temporary one. The peace process, he said, was inching forward. In Dublin, the American Vice President Al Gore met the Irish Prime Minister Albert Reynolds and said he thought the IRA had made it clear that they had renounced violence for good.
John Major and his government are nearly sure that the IRA ceasefire is permanent, but they're not completely convinced yet.
I find myself in a unique position in this respect. Unlike other people, I actually have the responsibility for the security of Northern Ireland. And I must be certain myself, absolutely certain myself, that this is not just a short-term ceasefire, but a credible, long-term, permanent cessation of violence.
But has Albert Reynolds, as his critics say, moved with indecent haste?
Well, everyone must make their own judgments about what pace to take things. The Taoiseach and I have worked very closely indeed over the last couple of years, and I don't doubt for a single second his commitment to have a permanent end to violence and to be able to move forward satisfactorily.
The Irish Prime Minister agrees that there's no risk of breakdown between him and Mr. Major. They started this together, he said, they'll finish it together. But while London still waits for clear-cut unequivocation from the IRA, the view here in Dublin is that it's already been provided.